Welcome to EJB Talks, Rutgers Blaustein School experts in policy, planning, and health, where we talk with our faculty and staff experts, as well as students, about how the fields of public policy, urban planning, public health, health administration, and public and urban informatics affect your lives. Welcome to EJB Talks. I'm Stuart Shapiro, the Dean of the Blaustein School, and the purpose of this podcast is to highlight the work my colleagues and our alumni in the fields of policy, planning, and health are doing to make the world a better place. Today, I'm speaking with a former student of mine and a member of the Blaustein School Advisory Board, Sarah Myers. Welcome to the podcast, Sarah.
Thanks so much for having me. Good to be here.
So we always start in the beginning with origin stories and such. So tell us a little bit about what led you to public policy.
It's a pretty winding road, actually, but I'll spare you the really early details. I studied German in undergraduate in undergrad, and then I thought I was gonna have a career in music. And so I went on and I did a audio engineering degree in Germany. Came back, was working in a recording studio, and the first time I voted was in Bush Score. And I was working in the recording studio when the re-elect happened, and I was so unmoored by that, and had been sort of active in protesting the Iraq War, that I sort of figured that being a recording engineer was not going to be my contribution to the world. And so I started volunteering and applying for school. And I figured that protesting was valuable, and also that it was probably more effective to try to make change from the inside, and thus the policy school application.
Yeah, I love the thinking about whether it's more effective making change inside or outside. And I don't think there's a right answer to that question. As someone who's had his career mostly on the inside, I sympathize with your direction, but I also understand that sometimes outside forces are needed too. So on the inside, you've done a lot of different things, and we could probably talk for hours about each of them, but let's give the listeners a brief overview here. And tell me about your work at HUD. Particularly, you were a Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Federal Housing Administration.
Yeah, I mean, that came after I was at HUD for about 9 years, and that came towards the end. I did like a series of sort of high visibility projects like the Recovery Act and Hurricane Sandy, the sort of building the STAT programs there, so for performance management. But being a Deputy Assistant Secretary is a senior executive service role, which is a kind of job in the federal government. And you're really supposed to be like a generalist that can move from policy area to policy area. In my case, I was tasked for operations. That was a team of about 115 people, I would say. And it was, managing the operations for, I want to say FHA was about 2,400 FTEs at the time. So like one of the biggest components within HUD. And honestly, my work there was like the first role as an SES, and I was significantly younger than almost everybody, and so a lot of it was sort of finding my way in that space. And the work itself was, a lot of work in government operations is about how do you find efficiencies, how do you make people who are in sort of back office roles feel more connected to the mission, because a lot of times you see separation between like the policy people and the ideas people and the people who have to do the implementation. And a lot of the time that lands in procurement and HR and everything else. And so, I did a ton of work around IT transformation there, but it was really the full portfolio of operations for a big team. And the thing that's most memorable is just like what it was like to be a young executive responsible for such a big shop, and then in particular in the midst of I got the SES on January 17th. I was certified by OPM on January 17th of 2017. And so it was like transition to a new administration. I had only worked for the Obama administration. This was the first Trump administration. So there was a lot of personal growth in that time, I would say.
Just for listeners, an SES is a senior executive service. It's the higher levels of management within government. And since you said efficiency and talked about working in government, I just have to push a little bit and say, so you mean there are people in government already who cared about efficiency, and that maybe we don't need a department of government efficiency?
Oh, goodness. Yeah, we could talk for a long time about that. Absolutely true. Like literally anybody who enters that space now, or not now, before Doge was like focused on how do you make this work faster and better. Everybody knows it's like too big, too sprawling, too many rules. And there's a lot of people thinking about how to make that better. And at a systems level, but also literally every day in the day-to-day like churn, transaction level work that people are doing across the government, like anybody who's in an executive role is like trying to make that better. So it should not. Make no mistake. There are plenty of people focused on this.
Yeah, no, what a lot of people don't understand is nobody inside the government has a stake in government working badly. And so everybody wants to see it improve. So after a little bit of time at HUD, after you got the SES and staying in the Trump administration, you went to local government. Tell us about that. And you switched policy areas. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, I'd had enough. I wanted to try something new. I had been, it was like my first job. I took 4 years between college and graduate school, so I was like a little bit older than people, my peers, some of my peers anyway, who entered the workforce when I did. But I'd been doing it for 9 years, and like for my generation, that actually felt like quite a long time to be in one place, even though I'd had probably 4 or 5 different jobs in that span. I like knew there was a world out there that I needed to go experience. And I was looking, I talked to people who had left the Treasury Department, but also HUD, and gone to work for DC government. And something that one of them said to me that really resonated and was super intriguing was, a fire drill at the Treasury Department is that the deck for the secretary is late. A fire drill in my actual job today is that there is a literal fire in the men's shelter and I need to go there at 1 a.m. And that sort of like urgency and the proximity to constituents struck me as like just vastly different than the experience that you have when you're doing like national scale policy making and writing NOFOs, or grant opportunities for the public, or regulation. It's just like a different beast. And so I went to go. I left housing, or I left the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and went to the State Superintendent of Education in DC, which is actually a state function, even though DC is not a state. If we were a state, it would be like, if we were in New York, it would be in Albany. Right. It is regulator and grant maker of traditional public and charter schools in DC. That was a team of about, I want to say 1,900 people. And I was hired as the assistant superintendent for operations. I became the deputy superintendent, overseeing ops, data, and technology. And I entered at a point where there was like very intense and very public scandal going on in one of the sort of city's big schools. And I felt immediately that proximity effect, that like, and the thing that's interesting to me about local government or state government is that like you both have to operate at scale and have systems level thinking about how you're serving 95,000 students and designing systems that make sense. And you have to pick up the phone and talk to a parent. And like
Right.
that is you have to go up and down the continuum like all day. And I think it's like very hard, also like really good for your brain, probably. And was just an experience that I really, anybody who's in federal government, I always tell you should go to local government, see what it's like. It's like a different, it's the same on some level, and it's like a different beast entirely.
So you answered one of my follow-ups was, did you get that urgency? And clearly you did. How'd you like it?
I mean, I loved it. It's like, it really also teaches you the impact of on like state and local entities of the grandiose visions that people have at the federal level. I remember getting I think that Ed put out like a PRA notice or something, Paperwork Reduction Act notice, because they were about to do some big collection related to grants that we were getting. And I'd done Paperwork Reduction Act work from the federal level, and it's like terrible. But then we like commented on this insane reporting that they wanted from us. And of course, like, you know, they took the comments into consideration and they did basically what we told them was going to be way too burdensome for all the good reasons that you have at the federal level. But like it creates real operational nightmares on the ground. And I think it having the perspective of both all of the levels of government and the continuum is just super. It makes you more effective in doing either, I think. But yeah, short, like long answer to yeah, I really liked it a lot. It was super interesting. I learned so much. Highly recommend.
And maybe we can talk about the Paperwork Reduction Act sometimes. I actually
I know you know quite a bit about it.
just had a reporter call me about it yesterday. But I don't think our listeners have the same level of fascination with it that I do. So I'm gonna move on past the PRA there. So you liked it, you had a good time. Then you come back to the feds, but this time in a different role. Tell us about that.
Yeah, you know, again, like 4 years at the education agency in DC, two of which were COVID, which was a whole other level of special,
Sure.
and challenging. And I was ready to do the next thing. There was new administration, you know, already underway with the Biden administration, and I was eager to sort of figure out a place to come back. But I ultimately ended up getting connected to a guy named Mike Schmidt, who was recently had been named the director of what's called the CHIPS Program Office. That's the Department of Commerce. The CHIPS Program Office is the manufacturing incentives side of the $50 billion that the Commerce Department got under the CHIPS and Science Act, which was passed in 2022. And it's a national economic security program, which is designed to incent companies, semiconductor manufacturing companies, to build new or expand or modernize commercial fabrication facilities known as fabs for semiconductors. I started as the COO and chief of staff. I think it was his 7th employee in January of 23. We ultimately scaled to, depending on how you count, it's like upwards of 150 people. And there was just like a real imperative to move quickly, both because everybody understood the urgency of getting these investments made in the United States. There's a whole like backstory on CHIPS and why it's important and why it's bipartisan, but it's one of these like sort of signature initiatives of the Biden administration that has a ton of attention around it, or had a ton of attention around it, and in our secretary like real expectation that we move as quickly as possible. And so that was a startup, you know, it was another start. There was a startup in government. that I, as COO, was building the sort of operational mechanics for, and really building the organizational culture. All while we were sort of designing this program on the fly, like what should be in our notice of funding opportunity, how are we going to run an investment process to select applicants and then negotiate deals with them. And that experience was just transformative for a bunch of reasons. But I think first and foremost is the level of talent, the people that we hired to that team from across sectors. We hired a lot of people from finance, from private equity, from insurance, from other parts of banking. We hired people from the semiconductor industry. We hired lots of people from government, from academia, and everybody we hired was just top-notch work ethic and super dedicated to our mission. And they all brought such different perspectives to the problems that we were solving every day that it was like the first time I really feel like I saw how diversity of experience really gets you to better outcomes. And ultimately, it sort of shaped what I decided to do after that adventure, which I left at the end of the Biden administration.
Do you want to speak briefly about your new venture?
Sure. It is very early days. I'm in week 1, but I've joined a climate-focused investment philanthropy organization, and I'm going to be focused on scaling the carbon markets, which is another area, climate and certainly carbon markets, that I, like semiconductors, know nothing about at the outset. But I'm really excited to dig in and help build some new initiatives.
So one of the reasons I wanted to go through your resume there was because it makes the point that you've done a lot of different policy areas and a lot of different levels of government. Can you sort of, for an MPP student, for example, tie that together with what in your education gave you the ability to make those, to have that diverse set of experiences and excel at them?
Yeah. I mean, it's not like one-to-one, right? But I think that people make choices about whether to be a generalist or not, or go deep on a policy area. And I don't know that I had made that choice when I was at Blasting. At that point, I don't think I had really sort of wrestled with that as a choice. But I learned some things that I really had no experience in, like basic stuff, like macro and micro, and public finance. And I'm forgetting the names of some of the classes, but there was some basic stuff that I just had no exposure to at all, that made me conversant in a way that I wouldn't have been. And I think the other thing that I would say is figuring out what is the hard transferable skill that you have that people will, when you're early in your career, rely on you to bring to the table, then gets you in all the rooms. And then it's kind of at some point on your path, you have the opportunity to choose, do I want to continue to be a generalist and hop from area to area, or do I want to go deep on something? And for me, the path to breadth and learning has always just been being a generalist gives you so much flexibility to follow the people who are smartest and will be the most fun to work with. Anyway, so I don't know. That's a long answer to your question, but
no, but it's a good one, and yeah, I think useful. So, in terms of practical advice for students, what would you tell them?
Yeah, I think it's really there's a handful of skills that seem really basic, but that are essential. And I'm old at this point, so I'm sure the nature of having those skills has advanced beyond what what I have, but like when I was starting out, like I was the person who was going to handle like a large data set. And a large data set at the time meant like 13,000 rows in a spreadsheet to project, obligations and outlays for Recovery Act recipients at HUD. But and I know the scale is different now, but of what you can be expected to do. But like having a hard skill, like now like data analysis, having a hard skill, like really excellent writing, like persuasive writing, to be able to just still learn something quickly, distill the information into a succinct and coherent persuasive argument, is another super like transferable skill across policy areas. And then the other one that's sort of similar is like if you're an top notch, like, or if you're like excellent at organizing your work and figuring out the linear path from here to there, like really exceptional project management skills are also like if you have any of those three things in your repertoire, like you will be value add to whoever is the boss of whatever thing, and they will find a way to put you in the rooms that then get you the exposure you want.
That's great advice. I do want to clarify one thing. You
Mhm.
said you were old. You were my student, and if you're old, I don't know what that makes me. So I want to take issue with that statement. Sarah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Fun to chat.
A big thanks as well to Tamara Swedberg and Karen Olson who make the podcast possible. We'll be back in a week or two with another episode of EJB Talks with another expert from the Blaustein School. Until then, stay safe.